Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. We are delighted to welcome you to today's event hosted here at the National and Capodistrian University of Athens in collaboration with Hellenic Observatory of London School of Economics and Political Science. I would like to invite Professor Aristidis Samitas, Vice Rector for Finance and Development, to take the floor. Please.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the University of Athens headquarters. Dear Governor of the Bank of Greece, dear ex-Minister Professor Panos Tsakloglu, dear Professor Vasilis Monastiriotis, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you this evening to the main hall of National and Capodistrian University of Athens and the second lecture of the LSE Athens Lectures, an initiative of the London School of Economics and Political Science, organized in collaboration with our university, our Department of Business Administration, and the Master of Science in Financial Technology. Tonight is more than a formal academic event. It is an expression of a partnership built on shared principles, academic excellence, openness to society, and a commitment to bringing rigorous research into the public conversation. The collaboration between University of Athens and the LSE, particularly through this lecture series, creates a bridge between the Greek academic community and one of the world's leading centers for the social sciences. And this bridge matters especially at a time when complex social challenges demand careful evidence, international comparison, and interdisciplinary thinking. I would like to thank all of those who contributed to this event, and I'm delighted to acknowledge our chair this evening, Professor Vasilis Monastiriotis, Professor in Political Economy, and the Eleftherios Venizelos Chair of Contemporary Greek Studies at LSE, and Professor Irene Kaperidou, whose expertise will enrich the dialogue that follows. Allow me now say a few words about the keynote speaker without anticipating, of course, the introduction would follow from Professor Monastiriotis about Almudena, Sevilla. Professor of Economic and Social Policy at the LSE, internationally recognized for her work on family economics, labor markets, household behavior, and gender inequality. In January 25, she was appointed as a Commander of the Order of the British Empire for her contributions to economics and for her leadership in advancing women in the profession. This evening's lecture is on gender roles and parental time allocation and goes to the heart of a major question that is simultaneously economic, social, and deeply human. How time is shared within households, how gender roles are shaped in everyday life, and how the economics of time influences opportunities across the life course. And the thing is, why we focus on time? Because time is perhaps the most universal resource in theory. Each of us has 24 hours a day. Social norms, institutional gaps, and economic concerns often translate into unequal burdens of care on work and households' responsibilities And this inequality does not remain inside the home. It extends into the labor market, shaping the participation, career progression, earnings, and of course, because of the parental time, support, learning, care relates directly to our children's development and the formation of human capital. As a university, University of Athens, we believe our mission is not only to generate knowledge, but also to create the spaces where knowledge meets society. The LSE Athens Lecture Series serves exactly this purpose, bringing high-quality research into a setting where it can inform debate, encourage reflection, and contribute to policy thinking grounded in evidence. Let me conclude by thanking you all for being here with us and by inviting you to engage actively, making questions in the discussion that will follow. With that said, I'm pleased to hand the floor to our chair, Professor Vasilis Monasteriotis, and then to our keynote speaker, Almudena Sevilla. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Dear friends, dear guests, dear governor, colleagues, former students, I can say happily, it's a great pleasure, as always, to be here. This is the second of our revamped Athens lectures that we have in collaboration with Athens, the University of Athens. As Hellenic Observatory, operating in the last couple of years as a research center at the we'd like to think world-class famous London School of Economics. It is part of our remit, part of our ambition, and we think also part of our responsibility to communicate the excellent research that happens at the London School of Economics to audiences across Greece and definitely also in Athens, but also to try to translate the research that we do at the Hellenic Observatory, but also that the London School of Economics does more generally, try to translate it not only to policy audiences, policy makers, policy formers, but also to the wider public or to the interested community. This event is attended here, but also live streamed and will be available on YouTube, I have to say, on the HO YouTube channel, exactly because we want to bring in fresh ideas, open up debates on things that we find in our research, we find in our interactions with the wider academic and policy community internationally to be of heightened importance, heightened relevance. The topic that we have today, broadly saying on the gender dimension, is one of the three topics that we try to spearhead in our own research at the Hellenic Observatory. The other big topic is about the growth model, which includes everything from the political economy of reforms, if you want, to the re-specialization of the Greek economy into different sectors and different type of skill sets and so forth. So it cuts across the labor market, industrial production, services, internationalization, and so forth. And the third thematic area that we want to highlight and to advance is what we call citizenship, but basically it is about the perception of the citizen, what is if you want, the obligations of being a citizen, what is the relationship across society between people, but also between the citizen and the state. And I have been very blessed to have some very interesting conversations my couple of days here in Athens on the opportunity of the visit. And I think this is something, a message that comes up time and again in the conversations that I've had. But, you know, as the old slogan goes, how can we change our economy or comparative advantages if we don't change ourselves. And I think this kind of, the key word here is acceptance. Without acceptance of modernization, of learning to do things differently, of how technology will affect the way we operate, and for that matter also on the topic of today, without acceptance that we have to cherish part of our traditional values, but while at the same time embracing a different set of values that award equality of opportunity, equality of outcomes as well, to, let's face it, slightly over 50% of our community. So on the gender dimension, without this acceptance, this recognition, I think any type of reform, any type of modernization program will always be lagging. It is a great pleasure to be bringing in the Athens Lectures celebrated colleagues from the London School of Economics to present their research. It's not exception today. Professor Sevilla is one of our star professors at the LSE. The Vice Rector gave a brief bio of her, but I just want to say that she's really a leading figure in the debates in academia about the position of women in academia, as well as the position of women in the labor market, which is the topic of today. And I'm very pleased to have as our discussant, Professor Camberidou. We want to blend economics with the other disciplines in the social sciences, and it's an opportunity to have a historical sociologist or a sociologist to be our discussant today. A last word I want to say, we have been able to have these events, not only thanks to the very, very constructive collaboration with the University of Athens, to which we are thankful, but also thanks to a number of sponsors, Metals, the Bank of Piraeus, Alpha Bank, and Eurobank. But I want to highlight how the corporate sector is also contributing to that, to the opening of the agenda. And just to highlight that the Bank of Piraeus, for example, has a very active program on reintegration of women into the labor market after motherhood, but also female entrepreneurship. These are things that are very important to be advanced not only by some academic intellectuals who sit somewhere in their offices and theorize or estimate empirical models, but it is something that has to be spilled down to society by the civil society, by the corporate sector, by academia, by different interest groups. So I don't want to say much more, but I would love to think that your attendance here is just the first step towards interacting more and more with the Hellenic Observatory at the London School of Economics, learning more of what we do, and telling us how you can support our mission on the educational front, or the research front, and on the policy informing front. With these few or not so few words, thank you all for being here, and I would like to invite to the floor Professor Sevilla for her talk.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm really embarrassed. I'm originally from Spain, but I've never been to Athens, so it's really good to be here. I had a chance to walk around this morning, and I'm gonna take the opportunity to visit this beautiful city. Thank you so much for the invitation and for being here today. So I wanted to talk about recent work that I'm doing, and I'll try to do it in an informed way, but not very technical way. And you'll have a chance to ask me questions if there is anything unclear. But I also want to take the opportunity to sort of give you an idea of how the economics field, which is my discipline, is moving in this area of gender economics. So, and then place my work within that movement. So the good news, if you are an economist and if you are a woman economist, as I know some of you in the audience are, or if you are a man interested in gender issues, is that there has been an exponential growth in the amount of work that is being done on gender in economics and in the economy. So here we have the number of papers that have been written. So if you look at the red and sort of pinkish bars there, we start to see an increase in the amount of work being done with either women or girls in the title from the beginning of the 2000s. So this is good news for me because this is, 20 years ago, more or less. This is when I started to work on these issues. Thank you. So it is good. Economists are waking up to the importance of women in the economy, and of course, I think the recognition of Claudia Goldin. She was the first woman professor awarded the professorship at Harvard, and she was recognized as the Nobel Prize in Economics for her understanding of women's labor market outcomes a couple of years ago, has really been a before and after for the discipline. And I want you to take you back to basics and to, as Professor Monasterios was talking about, why should we care about women in the economy? Is this a matter of equality? Or is this a matter of economic growth? So from an economics perspective, if we think that human talent is distributed equally among men and women, if half the population is not reaching their potential, we are wasting a lot of talent. And we know that talent is a scarce resource, and we need talent for economic growth. So we're losing a lot in terms of our potential for growth and innovation if we're not ensuring that talent is reaching their full potential. So this is really the economic argument for equality between men and women. But of course, this argument rests on the assumption that talent is distributed in the same way between the genders. And I like to show this graph because this is relatively new in the social sciences, and I think it breaks a lot of biases and misperceptions in society. So we know now that in the left-hand side, you see the differences, the two distributions of men and women heights, and we see that the two curves are relatively apart, and there is a number there, but basically what this is showing is that on average, men are taller than women. And this is statistically significant, so we can assure that statistically speaking, this is true. But if we look at other traits that economists know are important for your performance in the labor market, and here we have self-esteem or confidence, we see that the differences between men and women are very, very small. So really, there are no difference or no statistically significant differences. Okay, so this is something that is relatively new, that is creeping into what economists or how economists see the world, but actually this equality of the distribution of talent is key to make the argument about efficiency in the economy from equality across the genders. However, there is still a bit to do. So I just want you to focus on the first two graphs, the top bars. So this is what people think about overconfidence. So this is another trait that we know is important for labor market outcomes, for how much money you make, basically. So if we look at the second bar, so that's, well, 1, 2, 3. So the third bar, the second bar from the top, the third bar from the bottom, this is what the studies say. And if you look at the green portion, that 70%, it shows that men and women, according to the studies, they are very similar in terms of overconfidence. So most studies will tell you that men and women are very similar according to this trait. But the top bar is what economists think. And this is from some colleagues of mine who did this piece of research. So they surveyed some economists and finance people, actually, so not just economists. And the green bar at the top, you see it's very, very small, right? So most, whereas the orange one, that's the bar showing, telling us that men are overconfident. This is what most economists and finance researchers would believe, okay? So stereotypes are still quite strong in the economics profession. Yet at the same time, we're making this claim about efficiency without really believing that traits are equally distributed. So this is something that I like to show because I think changing the stereotypes is part of, it's halfway through changing the situation of women, both in the profession but also in the economy. So I don't want to be too pessimistic here. So of course, there has been a lot of progress in the last 20 years that has been documented in terms of labor market participation, in terms of closing of the gender gaps, in terms of education. So we now know that women graduate from college in most countries at higher proportions, at a higher proportion than men, right? So there has been a lot of progress. Yet there are two issues that are stubborn and that do not seem to be changing at the right pace. One of them has to do with educational choices. So girls and women continue to shy away from STEM courses such as mathematics or physics or engineer. And this is worrying because those are the courses that have the higher returns in the labor market. And I have worked on that, so I'm happy to talk at the end. But I'm going to talk about the second issue today, and this is the motherhood penalty. What is the motherhood penalty? So the motherhood penalty is what women have to forego when a child arrives. So we have started to document that women stop working or start working fewer hours when the first child arrives. We know that that has an impact on their earnings that could be as high as 30%. And this is not something that happens in the following the first 2 years after the birth of the child, but it's actually something that is very persistent. So 10, 20 years after the birth of the child, a woman, or a mother in this case, hasn't really gone up to the level that she started off. And earnings remain about 20% lower than what they should have been. So this is where we are in the literature. This has been documented, but the mechanisms are not really understood. And this is what the paper that I want to talk to you about today is going to be about. So from an economics perspective, we can talk about two different mechanisms that are at play here. Why women suddenly stop working? One mechanism is that, of course, the arrival of a child means that there is a lot of work to do at home. So this is the supply side mechanism. Another one is the demand side. So firms will start to react in different ways to mothers and to fathers. They would decide not to give a big project to a mother that just had a child, for example. Now, the demand, firms' behavior is very hard to measure and to study. So the literature is still very nascent when it comes to that, but there are already some studies there. Today I'm going to talk about the supply mechanism and what goes on inside the home. And I'm going to try to give you a sense of what we knew before I started to write this piece of research and what came after we did that piece of research. So the paper I want to talk to you about today is how we think about parental time, because that is going to be crucial in understanding the motherhood penalty, right? So what is the dominant sort of explanation from economic theory? What has been the dominant explanation since the 70s? The explanation has been, and theories, but both, so the theories of human capital that started with Jacob Mincer in the 70s would tell us, well, a child arrives, a mother needs to stay at home because somebody needs to take care of the child. That is a lot of work during the first years. And then afterwards, the mother could return to work, but she has lost a lot of capital. First of all, her skills have depreciated because they are no longer useful in the labor market, but also she has lost a lot of experience. So she's at a disadvantage, so she's not going to come back to work, right? That has been the dominant explanation, and of course that has translated into policy. So if you think that this is the world that we live in, then what is the solution from a policy perspective? The solution is to make sure that when a child arrives, the impact on mother's time is minimal. So we have a state provision of childcare, at least, if not straight after the child is born, soon after. And we have maternity, and now we have paternity leave, right? So we allow that childcare time to happen and not to have an impact, in theory, on mother's labor supply. And then afterwards, when the child goes to school, the child is a little bit older, the demand on mother's time is not there anymore, or this is what the theory says, then we retrain these mothers and they should be able to come back to work because we retrain them in a way that they gain the human capital that they have lost, right? So this is how the theory and the policy have sort of worked together. And the problem is that we have been implementing these kind of policies for over half a century now, and we still observe the motherhood penalty. We still observe earnings of mothers decreasing by 30% 20 years after a child has been born, and mothers not returning to work. So our question here is, what really are we missing here, right? And what we say is that, well, or our hypothesis to start with was, well, what about if childcare time, if the demands at home do not go away when children reach, say, 5 years, but actually mothers, particularly mothers, need to be on call. So they need to be emotionally available. They need to be there for the child, even when children are much older. If that is the case, then the policy implication is of course very different to the policy implication that derives from the traditional model. So of course, what sort of, if this is the case, what sort of childcare demands are we talking about? We're talking about childcare demands that are going to impose a cognitive load on mothers' ability to work. There's going to be interruptions, so if you have teenage kids, you probably know that you may be there waiting for them to talk to you, but you never know when they are going to be ready to talk to you. But if you're not there, you can't do the high-quality childcare that you want to do. So there's a lot of idle time waiting and being emotionally available, and that, of course, has an impact on the ability of mothers, in this case, to return to work. Okay, so this was our hypothesis, and we decided to test it with the data. And I think I was talking to somebody else before about this work in particular, and we couldn't have done it before this year, okay, or last year. This is when we wrote this paper, for two reasons. The first reason is the data wasn't there. And I'm going to show you a little bit the data that we're using here. We're using the American Time Use Survey. So these are 24-hour diaries where a representative population of the US, in this case, is asked what they do at every point of time during a whole day. Okay, so it gives us a lot of detail. And this data has been collected annually since 2003. So not only do we have a lot of detail, which we need for this type of work, but also we have a lot of observations, right? We've amassed thousands of observations. And because of the nature of the empirical analysis that we're going to do, and I won't be very, very technical, but I think it is important because basically the message is without this data, there wouldn't be this piece of work, okay? And the other reason is that we now understand much more about human brain. So we now understand that a lot of human brain development goes beyond the early years. And parents and peers and teachers, they can affect human development, right? So what parents do beyond the early age is important for their children. So we'll start with what we know and what we add to the literature. What do we know? So I've been working about 20 years on this kind of data and what people do with their time. And of course, we have documented that men and women do different things, right? But this is the sort of diary that we're going to be using here. And this is the kind of information that we have. So you can see in the left-hand side, I don't know how well you can see it, but basically we have every hour, or every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes, every 2 minutes, we have a different activity. So what we have done, economists, but also sociologists, is to look at those activities and to count the number of minutes that men and women spend doing childcare. And so there's been a lot of work there, including my work. So we know that men spend about 10 hours per week, women about 20 hours per week. But our argument is that that is not a real reflection of the actual time and demand on women's time. So what we want to use to measure this notion that women need to be or parents need to be emotionally available is we want to measure, let me go a little bit faster. We want to look at a piece of information in the data that tell us who else is present when certain activities are being done. Okay, so I've highlighted that in red. So not only do we know that women are, ironing or they are watching TV, but we also know whether a child is going to be present in the same room at the same time, okay? So that gives us this notion of being on call. And now we're going to see what happens when we add that on-call time to what has been traditionally our understanding of childcare time based simply on the activities. Okay, so this is the exact question is, while doing whatever activity, who was in the room with you, or if you were in a car driving, who accompanied you, right? So when we look at that measure, that gives us much more time with kids than if we simply look at direct interactions with children, where the respondent simply says that he or she is doing childcare. Okay, so this is, we can think of supervision time, we can think of monitoring that the kid is doing their homework while we're doing something else, or simply being emotionally available for your child as they age. But however you think of those times, these are times that are going to impact your ability to work in the labor market. All right, so I said that we're going to use some fancy methodology. It's called zero-event study approach. I'm not going to talk too much about it. Basically, we need to match mothers and fathers to other mothers and fathers that are going to have children at different ages. Because we don't have the full history for a mother or for a father. So we're going to try to find matches for them so that what we interpret here is the evolution over time as if we were talking about the same person. 10 minutes, okay, yeah, I have time. So this is why we need a lot of observations. This is why we need to do it with this data that has been collected for a long period of time. Okay, so let me just move to this one. Okay, so you may say, well, but okay, you are counting the minutes that a child is present in the room, but maybe, I'm doing something else that has nothing to do with the child and that has no impact on my ability to work, okay? So we do a check in the data. We have information on whether you're taking care of a child. So there is a question in the diary that for every piece of activity that you're doing, they're going to ask you, were you looking after a child? So this is a question that tells us that there was some kind of supervision going on. The problem with that question is that it's only collected up to age 13, whereas the question that we are using is collected up to age 17 of the child, so this is why we use the variable that we wanted to use, whether a child is present. But what you see here at the bottom, those numbers, 94 and 95%, what they tell you is that when a child is present, 95% of the time, the mother or the father reports that they are looking after a child. Okay, so this is not simply, the child is there, but I'm not really, paying attention. At least for up to age 13, this variable of a child present is actually capturing responsibility for caring. And this is what we argue has an impact on your ability to work. All right, so let me show you the main graph from this paper, or one of the main graphs. So I don't know how good you can see this. I can't even see it in my, all right, so if you, the blue line, right? So what we have in the x-axis is the age of the child. So the vertical red line is when a child is born, okay? And we're going to see what happens to childcare. So we see that after the birth of the child, if we look at the blue line or the purple line, the amount of childcare that mothers do shifts to 20 hours per week. as children age, that amount of childcare decreases. So this is childcare based on activity. This is the type of childcare that a mother would say, I am doing childcare, okay? This is what the literature has normally used. So it goes up very much, but then it drops, and it drops almost to 5 hours per week when the child is around 17. What about this new way of measuring childcare, what we call the being on call, that we measure by the presence of a child? That is the green line. And what we see there is that it actually goes up by much more when the child is born, so you are with the child almost 30 hours per week. And also, very interesting, it doesn't drop as children grow older. So they stay very flat, even when children are 13, 15, 16, 17. So if we add these two together, they add up to, well, at the beginning, up to 60 hours, and then it drops to around 40 hours per week. So this is quite a significant amount. And this is mothers. We do the same for fathers, and for fathers we observe a similar pattern, but of course the levels are much lower, both for the traditional way of measuring childcare, the blue line, and also for our new way of measuring childcare, which is the green line. So rather than going through the numbers, I'm going to show you how the different types of, or taking into account these on-call childcare actually compares to what happens in the labor market. Okay, so in the left-hand side, we have labor market hours. The blue bar is men, the blue line is men, the red line is women. And what we see is this drop that I already told you. So women drop the number of hours in the labor market after the child is born, and men don't, okay? And the difference is about 14 hours, and that persists well beyond the birth of the child, and up to here we have the child being 17 or so. In the right-hand side, what we have is the difference in childcare time by men and women with this new measure of on-call time. And when you put that new measure and you compare men and women, what you see is a gap between the amount of time that men spend looking after their children and the amount of time that women spend looking after their children. That gap is very, very similar to the gap in work hours. So another way to see this is this graph here. So the gray area at the back would be the difference in work hours by men and women, those sort of 14 hours over the lifespan of the child from 0 to 17. The blue area is the bit that is explained by the traditional measure of childcare. Childcare measured as an activity, okay? People filling the diary and telling the interviewer that they are doing childcare. And we see that the portion that is explained by this traditional measure of childcare is small, and it decreases as children grow older. The green line, or the green area, is the portion, the gap between hours that men and women spend with the child present. And that we see that together they can explain the gap in labor market hours, but also the proportion of labor market hours gaps that it explains remains very constant over the lifetime of a child. So I'm going to, because I have very little time, I only have 5 minutes, and I just want to talk about you know, so we have, so what do we do with this research, right? How can we change the world now that we have understood that things may not work in the way that traditional, the dominant sort of economic theory understood it to be? So traditional policies, as I said, focused on the early years, providing childcare to parents during the early years, and then retraining programs. But if mothers need to be there for their children even when they are older, those retraining programs are not necessarily going to work, right? So how do we move forward? One way is for the state, or having a state-funded childcare beyond the early years. So the northern European countries, for example, have school clubs that run after school clubs that run after schools. The Anglo-Saxon countries have youth clubs that are focused on the low-income sort of families. And this is an example. For example, in Britain, the last government sort of cut funds to fund this kind of youth clubs. The other policy solution is to make it easier for parents and for mothers to provide this type of care, right? And this is where the flexible work policies and other arrangements like remote work come in. But of course, these policies are a double-edged sword, because they also may backfire on women, as companies may not hire women. The other sort of policy is to change the technology of work, to change the way we work. And this was sort of Claudia Goldin's argument, right? If we really change the way we do things so that neither mothers nor fathers need to be at work all the time, then they can be at home. And this could be something that either the mother or the father can do. Now, none of these policies are really challenging the social norms of care, right? Providing a state provision of childcare, or providing flexibility, or changing the technology of work may reduce the cost of doing childcare, but it's not going to change the social norm around who does the childcare. So I want to close up with a question for the audience, and to really have you think about what sort of policies could we implement that actually challenge the division of household labor, the division of childcare within the home, so that we can really change what goes on in the labor market. And I think with that, I'm gonna thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sevilla. We now invite our discussant, Professor Irene Kamberidou, Professor at the Department of Sociology, School of Economics and Political Science at National Kapodistrian University of Athens. Please, take the floor.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear students and friends, I'm deeply honored and grateful to have been invited to participate as a discussant in the London School of Economics Athens Lectures. Such events are a wonderful opportunity to reflect, to share knowledge, connect, and strengthen collaborations. Thank you all for being here. I would also like to acknowledge and applaud the dedication, the originality, and the pioneering work of Professor Almudena Sevilla, and especially her research on why economists care about gender equality and the wastage of talent, as well as the new way of thinking about parental time investment. Undoubtedly, without a doubt, meaningful solutions require addressing the deep-rooted gender order, namely anachronistic social stereotypes, norms, and institutional inequalities. As regards Greece, for example, although the female employment rate has risen significantly over the last 4 decades, it went from 35.8% in 1981 to about 60% in 2024 and early 2025. Female employment in Greece is still the second lowest in the EU, just above Italy's. As regards parental time allocation in Greece, and despite the increasing female workforce, traditional roles persist, with women juggling domestic and public life and responding to many and diverse needs, such as childcare, housework, dependent adults, for example, other than their husbands or partners, their parents, their in-laws, extended family, and in many cases, family members with disabilities. This unpaid female labor model, these extensive unpaid care services provided by women in Greece, as is the case in most countries, create barriers to employment and to employability. For those women who are employed, and especially mothers, these barriers affect working hours, salary increases, promotions, or professional advancement. Obviously, existing policies in Greece are not enough. Oops, where is it? Okay. As a result of these multiple caregiving responsibilities, gender gaps, like the gender employment gap, the wage gap, the leadership gap, and inevitably the pension gap, are being reproduced, ultimately perpetuating gender inequalities in Greece. Current studies show that women in Greece are still the main caregivers. For example, they usually leave the labor market to take care of their children or other dependents. And for those women who work, although parental leave policies in Greece support shared responsibilities, it's usually the women that take them. Or women decide to work part-time, or they're forced to take breaks during their careers, or they choose to return to the labor market in less specialized and less demanding positions, which means less money, lower salaries, with no future prospects, and in the end, lower pensions. In her research paper, Professor Sevilla correctly argues that mothers' on-call parental time is predominantly spent alone, while that of the fathers is more likely to be shared with the mothers. I need say this applies to Greece as well. I'd like to add here that at our university, the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, parental leave and paternal leaves are offered and used by all. Our colleagues are encouraged to take their paternal and parental leaves. And as regards flexible working arrangements in Greece, working parents are entitled to shorter flexible working schedules as well. I'd like to also quickly mention that at our university, since the year 2000, our university has been providing its staff with daycare and kindergarten facilities. Yet, as regards the academic community in general, and Greek society in general, women's activities and achievements outside the home have intensified, resulting in the deepening or magnification of the multitasking whirlpool, a term I coined in 2018 to describe the discriminatory gendered time allocation pattern. a pattern which is intensified even further when women are married and have children, as clearly illustrated in Professor Sevilla's lecture. The multitasking whirlpool is a term I use to best describe women's repeatedly documented for decades experience and pattern of being pulled in all directions, juggling professional, social, family, and domestic obligations while pursuing individual, personal, or creative goals and needs. The multitasking whirlpool is a result of sociocultural expectations related to gender role ideologies that have led to the pattern of having to do it all, or specifically, the superwoman, superhuman identity. In Greece, housework remains a gendered activity, even with couples where the woman or the wife works more hours than the husband. Research findings in Europe, published in 2024 by the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, argue, to quote, that the absolute largest gender-based inequality in housework is recorded in Greece. According to this study, 80.5% of the housework time of dual earner couples in Greece is performed by the wife, whereas the husband contributes only 19.5%. And these figures do not include childcare. A recent study by the Women on Top organization, it's a Greek organization for the professional and economic empowerment of women, published a qualitative and quantitative study last year which addresses the gender gap in unpaid care in Greece, and it focused on men. It focused on men primarily during the COVID-19 pandemic because for Greek men, it was the first time they spent so much time at home with their children. Their survey included 504 participants who were private sector employees. Their research also took into account the recent legislation changes in Greece concerning the extended paternity leaves offered in the country. They examined these leaves, and unfortunately, their findings confirmed that we still have a very long way to go. On the other hand, looking at the bright side, I should say the Women on Top study also acknowledged that over the last 8 years, over the last recent years, a shift has been noted in young men's mentality in Greece as regards their role as fathers. I'm happy to say that a growing number of men today are recognizing the importance of fatherhood and are demanding a better balance between work and family life. Men are now more willing to share responsibilities and spend time at home to take care of the house and the children. However, I need reiterate that we still have a long way to go because the 2025 study showed that in Greece, gender stereotypes prevail, with care responsibilities perceived as a woman's job. Secondly, Greek men usually avoid taking parental leaves due to fear of social judgment, social stigma, or else being perceived as losing their masculinity. Thirdly, and most significantly, due to financial or economic factors, since men usually make more money or have higher salaries than women or hold better positions than women. In other words, the gender pay gap and the gender leadership gap prevail. I need point out that the 2019 European Directive 1158 was incorporated into Greek law in the year 2021, extending paternity leave to 14 days immediately around childbirth. The law also introduced a 4-month paid parental leave for both parents. It also includes flexible working hours, part-time work for parents, and working remotely. Unfortunately, in Greece, according to the results of the study, men seem to avoid it, or when they take it, men usually view paternity leave as a way to support their partners or their wives, rather than actively or solely engaging in childcare. In other words, not as a given duty, a role, or an obligation, but as helping or supporting their wives or partners, as babysitting, or as doing them a favor. A plethora of studies argue that education may be a key factor related to time allocation decisions. Why? Because in recent decades, women have been outperforming men in terms of educational attainment, and consequently, the cost of doing unpaid work has risen. What is also most noteworthy is that education plays a vital role in the time devoted to childcare. Research confirms that highly educated parents, mothers and fathers, both gender, both parents, devote more time to childcare and less time than do less educated parents. Women have been outperforming men in terms of educational attainment at our university as well. Our university's Gender Equality and Anti-Discrimination Committee's latest gender map, gender distribution report, which is also available online in English, shows, among other things, an overrepresentation of female students and female graduates at all educational levels. In spite of this, women continue to face an uneven playing field, with less career support and fewer opportunities to advance. Very alarming, another very alarming finding as well, and not only in Greece, are those in the recent study you see on the slide, which is published by Lenin Organization and McKinsey and Company, which shows that many companies are deprioritizing women in the United States. And I'd like to ask Professor Sevilla, could this be a foreboding of what's to come? This is the largest study on the state of women in corporate America. What I found quite alarming is that only half of the companies were prioritizing women's career advancement, and there was a declining commitment to gender diversity. And as regards flexibility, the flexibility stigma, their findings show that women who work remotely are stigmatized. They are less likely to get promoted or have a sponsor at work. Additionally, when they use flexible work arrangements, co-workers assume they are less engaged and less productive. Another thing I found quite alarming, and hope this trend does not apply to Greece or anywhere else, and I'd also like to ask Professor Sevilla if she has noticed such a trend, is that for the first time since the launching of the annual study, there is a notable gender ambition gap, a large, notable gap in the desire of women to advance. Inevitably, according to a study on the motherhood penalty in Greece, women's labor market performance is deteriorating, while that of men's is improving. Does this indicate an ambition gap in Greece as well? This study compares Greece to Norway. It was published in 2025 by Eliamap, the Hellenic Foundation for European Foreign Policy. In Greece, there seems to be no child penalty for men, whereas women's employment decreases by as much as 37.9% when the first child arrives. Additionally, the data on Greece from the Eurobarometer survey also showed that 70% of the respondents believe that family life suffers when mothers work full-time, and 48% believe women should prioritize family over career. Okay, I'll move on since we're almost. Hold on. Accordingly, in order to achieve an equal sharing of care responsibilities, we need, among other things, to sensitize men and boys to participate, to join in on equal terms, as care is the foundation that holds societies together. In closing, I would like to say that the gender devaluation, in other words, the subtle processes by which women's work, women's contributions are minimized, undervalued, or devalued, have been reproducing gender stereotypes and consequently the gender gaps and skills shortages revealed in the current Global Gender Gap Report and Index of the World Economic Forum. Otherwise, we wouldn't need 123 years to reach full parity to close the deep-rooted gender gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Camperidou. We now open the floor for discussion and Q&A.
Yeah, you can hear me? Yes, yes. Okay, indeed, we open the floor for your questions. We can take Professor Camperidou can join us on the panel, and we will take questions. Or when you ask a question, please indicate, if possible, your affiliation and ask a brief question. But to kick us off, I would like to start with a comment as well. Slash question, I guess. I starting from the presentation the Professor Sevilla gave, you mentioned the policy solutions, and one was kind of mainly funding, start, childcare, longer school hours, and then another one was kind of policy, change in technology and how technology can allow more seamless shift changes, so there's no penalty for discontinuity of participation in the production process. But then the third solution, which I think also came out from your presentation, was the normative change, the change in values, and that also came very clearly, I think, also in the discussion by Professor Camperidou. I would like to, it is my curiosity, I don't have a preferred answer to that, but I would like to ask what is your view on, I mean, not only the feasibility of that, how many, generations will it take until we're gender blind properly, but about the desirability of that, is this, in a way, to put it provocatively, if men and women are equal in the labor market because of the commodification of the production, as a commodification process, which puts women, everybody into the labor market, isn't it this that, it erodes potentially the last frontier of whatever is the social structure of the family? So then, the parent becomes just a worker who produces at work and the produces at home, and all roles are equalized. So I'm not saying I'm advocating this, perhaps far from, but it is a bit of a question I have whether by trying to equalize too much, we end up homogenizing too much in a way that would alienate us from the roles that give meaning to who we are as well. So in a way, you de-gender so much within the family, does it affect the essence of what the family is? Sorry? Sorry, raise your hand and you'll be addressed. No. Okay, I mean, deep down the question is, do we know for sure that we want to do away completely with gender roles in the name of a labor market, a kind of market process? So I'm not saying that I'm siding for one or the other. Please don't assign it to me. I just want to say ask whether there's a discussion, a reflection on that. Is a question of, sort of market equality that may be too pervasive and go too far into the family non-commodified domain. Do you remember the question?
I'll try to. Yes, and I guess my answer it goes in line with what she was saying as well. So it's not about getting everybody suddenly to work, 100 hours, but it's about gender not being a determinant of whether you work or not, right? So, so I think that is the goal. It's not a prescriptive role. It's still valuing individual freedom, where your gender doesn't factor into a decision, whatever that is. And then in terms of what we want as a society, that will be shaped by dialogue and policies, right? Um, but but that is separate from the gender aspect, I think. That's my.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's give the floor to other people because Vasilis will talk all night.
Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation. I really enjoyed your work anyway. And I especially appreciate the point saying that by making things easier for women to keep their traditional role and work, we end up shooting our leg and perpetuating. Having said that, however, what I really like about your presentation is the fact that the issue uh, is brought closer to home, not only closer, inside the household. And of course, we can think about ways to outsource it and extend the hours of schools and uh, involving various people into this story. But it remains a fact that the balance between parents has to change. And in order to do so, we have to confront the situation and we have to forget what we took for granted 20 years ago, that we should not alienate men, we should just, go against capitalism, commodification, uh, and men should be our allies. But inside the house, they need some pushing in order to become our allies. And I think this is one of the reasons why it is so difficult to have a debate and a discussion about these things, because the roles are challenged, and people do not like that, especially when they're losing their privileges. So, how do you go about convincing people that losing their privilege is a good thing for them as well?
Well, that's why I started with the efficiency argument, right? That we like to make, that it's for society's sake. When you allocate talent to where they are most productive and you allow that talent to flourish, we all gain, right? Because productivity ideally increases, economic growth increases, the the size of the pie increases. It is true that there may be some losers, right? And I think it is really important, as with other shocks, right? Let's think about technological shocks, immigration shocks, globalization shocks. We know, economists know, that they benefit the society because they generate growth, but there are some losers, right? And I think we're not very good. And of course, I lived through Brexit, so I know what I'm talking about. We're not good as economists to sort of convince policymakers in society to make them understand that we all we all benefit from these changes, and I think gender is one of them, right? And having gender equality, I think it's the way forward, also from an economic growth perspective. But as you say, we need to be thinking about how we, how we convey that message, and this is something that economists at LSE and in other places are thinking about, not just with gender, uh, but with everything that is happening around the world. And we go back to what is happening in the US, right? We're thinking about new economic models because the economic model that we have right now hasn't worked. It's alienating big portions of the population, and that is driving a lot of the unrest, social unrest that we see. And I think gender plays into that dialogue as well as other things, right? Environment, um, uh, immigration, globalization, etc. Right? We need to find a new way, not only of thinking about these issues as economists, but also to convey those benefits to society um, more carefully, because they have been misunderstood in the past. I don't know, but I don't have the answer. I think we should just, yeah.
My name is Platontides, University of Paris. I'd like to ask a question about your statistical analysis. You presented the data from the pseudo panel. I'm just wondering whether you find some evidence of a cohort effect. Are things improving as new generations come in or not? And also, again, the similar nature, whether there's any influence on the changing technology, the ability to assign childcare, for example, to the laptop or to a tablet.
Yes. Those are very, very good questions. I'm not sure that we can look at generational effects with the data that we have, although, yeah, we haven't done it, I have to say. But it would be an interesting thing to do. I mean, from my previous work, what we know about childcare, and the discussant also mentioned that, is that it's increased threefold since the 70s. So parents are spending a lot more time with their children, particularly highly educated parents. So it would be really interesting to see how these things have changed over time. But remember, here we're looking over 20 years of data after the birth of the child, and we have data for, 20 years at most, right? So I don't know how much the data is going to allow for that, but certainly something to keep in mind. And then I forgot the second question.
About technology.
Oh, about technology. So this is something that, that we want to look at. So we were looking at different occupations, and we haven't seen a lot there. And this is consistent to other papers looking at the motherhood penalty more generally. These things are pretty consistent across occupations and education levels, etc. So this tells us that these are changes that are very rooted on the social norms and that are hard to shake. But again, we should be looking at that a little bit more carefully, particularly with everything that is happening right now with AI. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Brendan Megan, a member of the public. You didn't mention the demand side, but I wonder to what extent you think that firms'
Excuse me,
expectations...
could you please talk a bit louder?
Sure. On the demand side, to what extent do you think that firms' expectations of how parental labour will be allocated impacts this? Do you see an equilibrium whereby households' best response to a belief that women will do most childcare is self-fulfilling?
Yes, so I didn't talk a lot about the demand side and firms' reactions because the research is very, very, very new, particularly because you need detailed data on what firms do, which we don't always have. But what we see, for example, is that when maternity leave changes and becomes more generous for mothers or less generous for mothers, firms will react by hiring more or fewer women of a particular age range, right? So there are demand effects. So firms have an assumption about who does the childcare at home, and they do react when incentives change around the cost of providing childcare at home. And so I think it's a fascinating topic. Being able to see more than hiding and fighting decisions with the data that we have is very hard. Ideally, what we want to see is, for example, task allocations, to see whether when a woman, think of a consultant firm, right? They work with big projects. What happens when a woman is expecting a child? She may still be very committed, but suddenly she is assigned to smaller projects that have a very high cost of, getting to know your client, etc., and very low payoff, right? And this type of behavior is very hard to observe in a big sort of data set, which is the kind of work that I do. But I think we're moving in that direction. So we'll soon be able to document some of those more granular behaviors at the firm level, and to be able to link it to having a child or not.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed enormously your presentation, Professor Sevilla, but also Professor Camberidou presentation. I want to bring another issue here, which is a gender gap in financial literacy. We, in central banks, we want literate citizens to understand what we're doing, what exactly inflation is, why we want to bring inflation to the target. And we found out that despite the fact that, as you said, that women are better performers at school, they have better tertiary education, in Europe overall, there is a gender gap of about 12% in financial literacy between men and women in favor of men, and in Greece is even higher. Why is this so? Why is this financial literacy gap, and how you think we can improve upon the financial literacy of women?
That's yeah. I've also observed those gaps in financial literacy, very similar to the gaps in math performance. For example, you see those gaps, the PISA data that the OECD collects for 15 years old. Of course, they don't ask about inflation in particular, but other financial sort of decisions. And boys are more financial literacy than girls. And of course, that has implications for lifetime outcomes, right? Because you're making the wrong decisions, and women live for longer. So it's even more important for women to be making the right decisions. I know that in Spain and in some other countries there are financial literacy programs where they go to schools and try to educate boys and girls around these issues. I'm actually working with a big bank in Spain around financial literacy as well. So there are those interventions, but then there's also, going back to social norms and expectations and stereotypes. They do play a role. For example, in mathematics, girls are told not to follow math courses, and that is particularly so for teachers that hold very strong stereotypes about abilities that men and women have, right? So I wonder whether there is something along those lines as well for financial literacy. So again, it goes back to changing those stereotypes about not only about what men, girls, boys are able to do, but also their interests, right? Sometimes we assume that girls are not interested in finance or in math, and then they are being advised certain, to take certain courses or others, right? So I think we really need to be challenging those stereotypes as well. And for me, financial literacy, which is, I've become interested in that very recently, it's very, it is similar to what we observe with mathematics. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for your presentations. I would like to ask both Professor Sevilla and Professor Camberido, if it all comes down to gender stereotypes and social norms, which I believe it does, and being a mother as well, I know on-call time is tremendous. And traditional public policy is failing, like you said, because leave policies are advancing, and we have a lot of funds on training and women's employment programs. So my question is, how can public policy challenge these stereotypes and intervene in parental time allocation? Because after all, it is the private sphere. Thank you.
This is a really good question and $1 million question, right? But I think, well, the first step is to acknowledge that the stereotypes and gender roles exist and they constrain decisions. So that's the first step. And I think 20 years ago, we weren't there, and we are now, right? And the second step is for policies to ask themselves, or policymakers to ask themselves, if I implement this policy, am I perpetuating this stereotype, or am I challenging the stereotype in some way? And there is a good example now in Europe with paternity and maternity leave, which in most, well, not in most European countries, but certainly in Spain, Spain, for example, was the first country that implemented very short maternity and very short paternity leave, but equal. And it was obligatory for both partners to take it. So it wasn't voluntary for men as it is in some of the countries. And there is some research that shows that gender norms do change when policy challenges those gender norms, and then people react, and then they, their beliefs and their views do change. So I think there is a role for policy to anticipate society and implement these kind of policy making that is going to challenge those stereotypes, as opposed to simply making it easier for the main carer to be able to work and care, right? But it's equal paternity and maternity leave seems like a good policy for very early childcare. But how do you deal with the rest of the years where one parent really needs to be present somehow, right? And I think that's that's the next challenge.
Policy makers have been unsuccessful so far. They've been demanding measures, but we need accountability as well. Not just policies, punishments, accountability. And also, discrimination is hard to spot. We have subtle discrimination everywhere. So we need to make paternity and parental leaves mandatory, for example, for men, especially senior level men, because we need mentors, we need role models. That's one way. We need role models in order to reproduce participation. How can we get these otherwise we won't get these senior men, these senior executives to take paternity or parental leave, since they make more money, etc. Another thing is we have to share care responsibilities. Not forget the family, not dissolve the family, but share care responsibilities. That means cultural changes, institutional changes, and accountability again. If they are not practiced. Thank you.
I just want to briefly add an anecdote. So 20 years ago, I was working on these very same issues. looking at not this data, it wasn't there, but something similar, and documenting all these big differences in what goes on inside the household. And I was graduating from the US at the time, and I wrote a little article in a Spanish newspaper in my hometown, arguing that men should have equal paternity leave as women. And I got an email from one of my professors saying, well, but I don't understand what you're saying there. You're saying that women shouldn't have, shouldn't be able to stay in their home when they have a child. Isn't that against equality, right? And 20 years later, things have changed, and we understand that if we want equality, it means equality at home and equality at work, and in the same way that we have laws and quotas and other things to incentivize women at work, we should have incentives for men to be able to care. And we've seen that a lot of young men do want to care. And I think policies should be there to foster that. And to me, it's not only the equality of maternity and paternity, I think fathers should be getting more. Why not, right? So, thank you. All right, so, so it's about challenging the norms for policy making.
So we get one more question, and after that we have a big party downstairs waiting for your. So one more question, and then we're done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. My name is Georgia Panopoulou. I think I might have a sort of a start of an answer to your question and food for thought for you. It is true that the state and policymakers cannot intervene at the family level, okay? But we've been discussing since we started this discussion about interventions after people became parents. How about if we started at the school level? And this is where we're going to change the minds of people. And these people, these young men and young women, they're going to become employees and employers later on, and they will have a different mindset. So this is food for thought. And also, we've been discussing about equality, and I think that besides giving birth and breastfeeding, there is nothing else that men cannot do as well as women do, okay? Societies assume, and people assume, that women are better child givers. Why is that? I think it's insulting to men to say these things. Thank you.
So I was a little bit taken aback by the percentages of men in Greece that think that women should, are better caregivers. I think the proportion of Spanish men is about 20%, so it has gone down. But these, in Denmark, for example, where we want to think it is northern country, very egalitarian, they still think very much that women and mothers should stay at home during the first year of a child's life, and their public sector and childcare system reflects that, right? So social norms are very hard to change. And I think that's why we need the policies that challenge those social norms to change what goes on within the house, so that children actually of those parents can see a different division of labor. And there is a paper by one of my co-authors looking at the effects of paternity leave in Spain and gender roles or beliefs around gender roles of children. And children whose fathers took the leave, they hold more egalitarian roles than children whose fathers didn't take the leave. So policy can change those gender roles or social norms, and this is something that economists didn't accept 20 years ago. We thought, preferences, attitudes, values is something that we shouldn't influence. But what we are seeing right now is that, these preferences are malleable from very early on, and policies do change what children think. But those policies have to challenge those norms. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, as regards the Women on Top study in Greece, you're right. At least the younger generation of men, they noticed in their study, wanted to stay home, take care of the home and the children. They wanted a work-life balance. They enjoyed staying at home, and the study showed that their relationship, the bonding with their children and their wife or partner, increased. It was better. They formed a better relationship, and they served as role models for their children. So there is hope, at least for the younger generation, the young men in Greece.
Okay, I think that's a very, very appropriate point to end the event on a positive note and very much on optimistic. It is true, things are changing, different speeds in different issues. I hope we can continue this conversation both over a glass of wine, but also more generally in different forums. Let me just, by closing, thank again the University of Athens, of course, for co-organizing this Athens lecture, our sponsors. But also let me remind you that the next event is on the 28th of May. We'll have Professor Simona Iamarino, who will talk to us on a different topic on critical raw materials and industrial policy at the European Union, and of course we'll try to relate it again to the case of Greece. Thank you all for joining us. Please join us in thanking the speakers in the appropriate way.
Thank you all for your participation. You are warmly invited to the reception for drinks.